Hello everyone and Happy New Year! Welcome to Outriders New Horizon. Today's video is going to be an in-depth analysis for my Pyromancer firepower build. I'm going to also mention the mods and everything, so if this is the first time you stumble upon a video with my Pyromancer firepower, you don't have to check out the other video because everything there is going to be mentioned here, but in a more detailed way. Before we start, I have to mention that overall the bonus firepower Pyromancer is not our strongest build by far. It's very decent, however the skill damage builds is where the Pyromancer shines, the most powerful, so in case you want to, let's say, add a tier to it, it's low tier 2 compared to the skill damage build, especially the flame wave builds or the explosive builds or even the reforged build. It's much better if you run a hybrid, let's say, volcanic rounds reforged build, because the Pyromancer lacks the high damage compared to the other classes. If you want to do as much damage as the Technomancer or as a Trickster, we have bad luck. Unfortunately, we can never reach their numbers or the times. Especially the Trickster has very close burst DPS for millions of damage in a matter of seconds, and the Technomancer can melt down bosses and elites from across the map also in a matter of seconds. This is something we can't do, unfortunately, due to our mods, and we also lack a legendary set. Honestly, the Torturer set, I'm going to be blunt, it sucks. It has bonus firepower, close range damage, status power is not bad, but there are a couple of pieces that have healing received, and the Torturer set piece is actually, sorry about the comparison, it's trash. It doesn't offer any DPS increase. We will only afflict burn to enemies in a wider aura, that's it. That's not something the Pyromancer firepower is missing, but I'm not going to go in depth. I'm probably prepare another video why the Torturer set is very bad. So let's get back to our build. In case you have already watched the previous video and you just want to have the in-depth analysis why I chose the mods, thank you for sticking around. So without any further delay, we're going to start by the skills. This is the Dream Team, the 3 Musketeers, the Hat Trick, whatever you want to call it, whenever we go with bonus firepower Pyromancer. So volcanic rounds, in case you don't know, completely ignore the armor of the enemies. That's why we deal a lot of damage. That's why armor piercing is useless when we go with firepower Pyromancer. It also burns the enemies and inflicts burn in a wider range even if you don't hit the enemies. So we have some survivability, crowd control, increased DPS. Crowd control because the first time the enemies get burned, they get staggered for at least 1.5 seconds, so this can help you a little bit to survive easier. But our big tool for survivability and crowd control is obviously the Ash Blast. Thanks to our mods, it will affect the whole map, it will debuff the enemies, give us life leech, and it's a must skill when you go for bonus firepower Pyromancer. Feed the Flames will help us survive because it can give us a timely health. However, most of the times it will just give us the ammo we need back thanks to our mods, so we can keep up the volcanic rounds and have the highest DPS possible. Now let's start with the armor and mods. All the armor pieces are epic pieces. As I told you, the Torturer set is very bad if you want to go with this type of build. And we have bonus firepower, cooldown reduction, close or long range damage. Close range damage is actually a little easier to achieve because it increases the weapon damage dealt to enemies within 10 meters. In comparison, long range damage increases the weapon damage to enemies further than 18 meters. This is a little harder to achieve, that's why close range damage is something I do recommend to stack. However, if you're confident you can remain in long range, just stack the long range. Apart from that, you see we also have some status power, because 2 of our armor pieces will have status power. For myself, I have, you see, the leg and the feet. Why we have status power instead of close range damage? It's very simple. Status power increases the damage of the burn, toxin, bleeding. We don't care about that much because burn actually scales better with anomaly power and also a little bit with status power. But we need to increase the duration of the vulnerable and ash. Without status power, the ash duration is around 2.5 seconds. So you can, for example, pop up Ash Blast and keep enemies for 2.5 seconds. For the other 6 seconds, the enemies will be able to move. it will be harder for us to crowd control and kill them because we don't have as much survivability as other classes and we don't kill them as fast. That's why we stack a little bit of status power. Thanks to our weapon as well, I do recommend the weapon to have status power, critical damage, and either skill life leech or close range damage. But I'm using the Damascus offer, we're going to see why later. And that's why I have 55% long range damage and 90% status power. So the Ash duration and vulnerable, because we inflict things to our talent, will be increased by 90%. And we also have the talents to further increase it. That's why it's very important to stack at least 2 pieces of status power plus our weapon. This way you have better survivability and it makes sense to pump the Ash Blast and feed the flames to keep the enemies in Ash longer. Now let's have a closer look at each individual piece, the mods I'm using, what alternative mods we can use, and why we're using these mods. Let's start with a headpiece. Now the Epic Head has personal space and Ashen Boost. This is actually the only mod that doesn't scale with our weapon mod. However, 25% bonus damage to close range using the weapon is pretty high compared to having something to increase our firepower. So I do prefer to have this to have better criticals, and it's actually a very easy mod to get because it's a tier 2 mod, as well as Ashen Boost. Now it will boost your damage against enemies afflicted by Ash by 20%. This is another reason why we want Ash to remain longer, because for those seconds that enemies are afflicted by Ash, we deal 20% extra damage and another 25% thanks to our talent that we will see later. So this is very important to have these 2 mods are a must. Personal space can be a flex slot, but Ashen Boost is a must because it actually scales with our weapon mod. Now for the chest, we have the only survivability mode, Damage Absorber and Captain Hunter. I prefer Damage Absorber compared to Mitigation from Death. The latter will give you much higher armor, but it requires a build-up. I don't like having a build-up. Sometimes the weapon mode kills enemies and the armor mode will not proc. That's why I do prefer to have Damage Absorber, because it increases our armor and we have a stable of 67%, I think, yeah. Physical damage reduction, 10% resistance is almost nothing, but I do prefer to have a standard physical damage reduction in case I haven't killed enemies in 10 seconds, and to increase our survivability to survive a couple of jumping alphas or a boss or a couple of hits. The second mod is Captain Hunter, a tier 3 must mod that increases your damage against the list by 25%. This is excellent, it scales with everything, your skills, your mod, your weapon damage. That's why it's one of the best mods I do recommend. Now in case you haven't unlocked Captain Hunter, we can unfortunately use something that decreases our firepower, because I say unfortunately, it won't scale with our weapon mod. But we can use something like Bloodlust. Killing up to 3 enemies will give us a lot of firepower, I think more than 51,000 firepower, which is quite a lot and easy to obtain because it's the tier 2 mod. In case you don't find Bloodlust, you can replace it also with Ash Cleaner, because critical shots apply extra damage to enemies afflicted by Ash. Why this is a good replacement? Because usually the only enemies we will deal critical hits, and makes sense, are the elites. So we will take advantage of the Ash Cleaner place of Captain Hunter. I don't think the damage will be the same, especially for the mods. However, these two are pretty good replacements. Let's move on to the legs. We have Bullet Kindling, is one of the best mods for the Pyromancer at tier 2, 20% extra damage against enemies afflicted by burn, and this includes everything, the burn itself, kills, weapon mods. That's why it's one of the best. Now, the second mod is also a must because it's Ashes and Leeches. Whenever we use Ash Blast, it will increase our weapon leech by 40% for 8 seconds. So when we pop out the Ash Blast, you get a 40% weapon life leech, which is a huge improvement for our survivability and to keep us alive, because otherwise it will be quite difficult to survive without this. Unfortunately, there isn't any good replacement for a tier 2 or tier 1 mod in case you don't have Ashes and Leeches. There is nothing similar to increase our weapon life leech. There are, but only when we apply bleed, and that requires too many mods, so we were not going to do that. In case you don't have Ashes and Leeches, we can replace this with another mod that increases our firepower or the damage. For example, you can have Bloodlust and Ash Cleaner, both of them, and in that case you have to replace your weapon with something that has weapon life leech. Without this, you won't be able to survive once again, even without Dark Sacrifice. And without weapon life leech, can't survive. That's why you have to replace those two. So until you find the ashes and leeches, you have to use a weapon that uses the weapon leech. Now let's move on to the hand. We have both Ash increase range and Death Sentence. Now, this is a must because without this, the range of Ash Blast is very low. With 66% increased range, you can pretty much affect the whole maps. If I'm not mistaken, there could be a very few maps that in case you proc it very far away, you won't be able to affect certain targets. However, if you move to certain locations, you can easily affect the whole map. Death Sentence is something irreplaceable because it increases our weapon damage and anomaly damage by 40% and 30%, not on us, but for everyone, so the enemies will take extra damage by those sources. Without this, we don't have anything else to increase our damage quite this high. So we have to compromise once again until we find it and replace it with something else. Because this is the third mod we're going to replace, because I gave you already two options to replace another mods, we have to go with something like Crit Stack. It also offers a lot of firepower, however we have to go for criticals. And that being said, you will take advantage of this only when you fight most of the times the elites or few enemies, because it has a very short duration, however it stacks very fast. 4 or 5 seconds and it can build up 5 stacks very fast. It's quite decent, and until you find a Death Sentence, I do highly recommend it. Finally, let's move on to the boots that have the restoration of the volcanic rounds, bullet absorption tier 1 mode that replenishes 40% ammo to our magazine for every enemy affected by the skill. That's why we're also using Flame Grasper. It's a tier 3 mode that enables absorption of 2 additional targets. So worst case scenario, we get 40% ammo back. Best case scenario, we get full magazine back. It doesn't exceed the magazine, you won't get 120% extra ammo, you only get full magazine. Thankfully, there is an easy replacement for Flame Grasper until you find it and unlock it, which is the Wide Grip. It will enable absorption of only one additional target, however 80% ammo back is quite good. I'm just using Flame Grasper because it can affect an extra target, stun them, and in case I'm very low on ammo, I will go 100% back. But Wide Grip is something I used in my early builds, and it also worked quite well. For the weapon mods, I don't recommend to go with anything that gives you anomaly power. It doesn't scale with mod damage, that's why you can avoid those as power assimilation or arms of the anomaly, aura force or power from the ashes are actually pretty bad because we don't use anomaly power and doesn't scale with a mod damage. Others that I don't like, introvert would be decent, but I don't have any spot to spare, especially personal space. I have to sacrifice 25% bonus damage when we're in close range to just be in close range, so I don't have any open space to put this. For survivability, there are no many other very decent mods. Circle of Power could be something you can add in case you want extra super survivability to, let's say, sacrifice personal space and add Circle of Power, because this way you will have 45% extra resistance, and you can combine this with the Fortress and the Damage Absorber. You will have 55% base, let's say, resistance and another 30% up of the 55%, so you will basically can be very unkillable in the cost of the timers, but you have the option to do that, and I do recommend you can use it. Sharp Eye or anything that increases firepower, once we unlock everything else, I don't recommend to use them. We have 25% increased damage for personal space, Captain Hunter, Ashen Boost, Bullet Kindling. Any percentage is better compared to increase our flat firepower because they actually scale with our weapon mode, apart from personal space, which is a flat 25% increased damage, and it's actually one of the best modes you can have. That's why we don't use Dirt on the Barrel, Sharp Eye, or Bloodlust. These are only alternatives until, for example, the Bloodlust and the Ash Cleaner, until you unlock the best tier 3 modes that you can have, which is the Captain Hunter, the Death Sentence, and the Ashes and Leeches. Let's move on to the weapons and why I have chosen the Damascus offering as the superior option for more sustained damage, for better timers, and because you don't need any investment to know the level. But before we invest in the Damascus offering, we have to mention the tactical or short rifles that are the best, without any doubt, to the highest damaging numbers. Because of the high damage, the high critical multiplier, you must have critical damage, status power, long or close range damage to maximize your TPS. That being said, the assault rifles have a major flaw when you go with the Pyromancer. In case you don't go for criticals, it's very easy to lose the ammo in the magazine, and even when you go for criticals, it's also very easy to lose the ammo in the magazine. Because the monster enemies, the trash monster enemies, are biggest pain in the B to find the critical spots. The Brood Mothers is easy, the Alphas is okay, but the small Perfys and the other enemies, especially the dogs, are a nightmare to find critical shots. So with a couple of false criticals and if you don't have the cooldown up for Feed the Flames, you will run out of bullets very fast. If you go for human enemies, but it's easy to hit their head, this can be a better option. Now, why I have in my secondary weapon Brain Eater and Dark Sacrifice? Because first of all, Dark Sacrifice is the best mode in case you want the highest critical numbers. Without any doubt, there is no other mode. Even the Killing Spree doesn't offer as much damage increase compared to the Dark Sacrifice. It works quite well because we have the Ashes and Leeches, we have the status power to inflict Ash, so it's very easy to survive. Unless you stop using Ash Blast and stop shooting your weapon, then you will only die by that. I don't see any situation you can do that unless a mistake or a lag spike occurs. Now, why I have the Brain Eater? Because without this or reforging bullets for our armor, you won't be able to keep up the 30 clip size with our skill cooldown to refill the ammo. And that's the other major flaw for the Pyromancer. What we're missing actually compared to the other classes is a 50% increased magazine clip size. In case we had that, without a doubt, the assault rifles will just outperform the Damascus offering because we'll have 45% clip size and then it will be much harder to run out of bullets. But now because we have 30, this makes a huge difference and I have run out of bullets. My ideal scenario for a tactical assault rifle is not this actually, because unfortunately with this option we don't have any AoE capabilities, and although you will be able to have a little more sustained DPS because we have the Dark Sacrifice, or we can replace it with something else. We can actually replace it with Embalmer's Rage, because for 5 seconds after a killing shot, all following shots will be critical. This is actually better for sustained DPS. And this combined with Brain Eater, even against monsters you won't be able to lose Volcanic Round. However, we're losing 75% weapon damage that will hurt a lot. What I do recommend, instead of running the critical damage variant, I do recommend to run something with Weapon Life Leech, Close Range Damage, Status Power, Bone Shrapnel, and Dark Sacrifice. This offers the best DPS possible and we have better AoE, because Bone Shrapnel will just be able to kill the enemies that are close by or deal a huge amount of damage, especially thanks to the death sentence. They will take 30% extra damage, and if they are inflicted by Ash, another 20%. So Bone Shrapnel actually hurts quite a lot. But we run something with Weapon Life Leech because in that case we have to replace Ashes and Leeches with reforging bullets, otherwise we will run out of ammo very fast, and we have decent survivability because we have Weapon Life Leech, Close Range Damage and Status Power. In case you don't have the Dark Sacrifice, you can run other tier 2 mods that are quite decent. For single target DPS, Gravedigger's Frenzy can be quite decent, that will give us a slight increase in DPS. Anomaly Enhancement is not the best. There are no better tier 2 mods that give us a good increase in single target DPS apart from Death Chains that scale actually with all our mods and everything. Other tier 3 mods that you can use in case you want a little more survivability in the cost of DPS, you can definitely go with Killing Spree. However, keep in mind it requires a build up and you do lose a quite a DPS. And Fortress is ideal for maximum survivability with a loss of 45% weapon damage, but it works. You just do worse criticals and a little worse timers. The Damascus offering, on the other hand, is the superior option for many reasons. It has very good stats, it has 100 clip size, this is one of the reasons, and the other is the Claymore Torrent. It has 6 meter radius, it will damage 4 enemies, and it procs every 2 seconds no matter what you do, and it scales its damage with all our mods apart from Personal Space. So Ashen Boost increases the damage of Claymore Torrent, Captain Hunter increases the damage of Claymore Torrent, Bullet Kindling as well, Death Sentence 30% extra damage, and that's it. And our talents of course also increase Claymore Torrent. The other upside it will trigger no matter what, even if you hit an elite or a boss without killing them. So you can focus on an elite or a boss while killing surrounding enemies that charge, especially monsters. It's very effective and very powerful. And of course, we're using Dark Sacrifice for maximum single target DPS increase. Now, once again, you can replace this with something like, I do recommend to not go for Killing Spree. I do recommend to go for Fortress as a secondary option, because Fortress will scale with Claymore Torrent that deals actually quite a lot of damage, and you will also have much better survivability, and you will sacrifice some of the damage for the timers, but with a Fortress, I do believe you will be completely unkillable. You will have more than 70% mitigation damage, and you will have so much weapon leads, skill leads, that you won't be able to die at all. The huge upside for the Damascus offering is that we don't have to aim to enemies or go for criticals to kill them. That's why we do very good timers. So usually I go with Ash Blast and Feed the Flames whenever I'm low in ammo, and I just hip fire the weapon to kill the enemies, unless I go close to an elite, pop up Feed the Flames or Ash Blast to stun them in the place, go for criticals in the head, kill them fast. It needs a couple of seconds to kill elites throughout the level, and you just devastate everything. And the other thing, you can go for long range easy with the Damascus offering, because actually Claymore Torrent is very powerful. You will see it yourself, trust me, try this, and you will see a huge difference while trying the bonus firepower Pyromancer. It's a little unconventional compared to the original, let's say, builds that are out there. I also didn't like initially the Damascus offering, but for the sake of argument I tried myself, and it works surprisingly the best. Just try it, try this and try Tactical AR. You will see the difference in the timers just by yourself. Unless you're very experienced with the level and you know completely the meta and you're a very good player, then you may do better timers with the assault rifles. But including myself, I do better timers with Damascus offering. Now, there is a third option for a weapon that's between Damascus offering and assault rifle. It's a little better for single target than Damascus offering for plain numbers, but it's a little worse than the assault rifle and better in other aspects. Now, this is the tactical submachine variant. Why it's better than the assault rifle? Because it has 60 bullets. That's the only difference. So you don't actually need reforging bullets or brain eater. You will never run out of ammo using this type of weapon. Only Feed the Flames is more than enough to give you your ammo back. You can run both Shrapnel, Dark Sacrifice or the other mods I suggested, but it's not as effective as the tactical ARs. You won't deal as much damage, and it lacks the AoE burst damage capabilities of the Damascus offering, so it's in between, let's say. In my opinion, it's the second best choice. If you don't have a Damascus offering and you don't want to go with a tactical AR, I do recommend to go with a tactical submachine. You lose a little bit of damage, however it's much easier to not run out of volcanic rounds. That's our only problem, to run out of volcanic rounds. Add Bone Shrapnel, Dark Sacrifice or Killing Spree. Actually, Killing Spree is quite decent for this type of weapon instead of Fortress, or you can go with another tier 2 mod, the Gravedigger or something similar, until you unlock a very decent tier 3 mod to increase your damage. For the sidearm, I forgot to mention, I'm not using it obviously because I plan to never run out of volcanic rounds, and that's why I have a random, let's say, sidearm. However, I do recommend about the two weapons. In case you want to have a sustained DPS, you can go with something like Damascus offering and have a secondary weapon, Inferno Seed. This actually can be very useful with almost the stats, because I wasn't very lucky with my epic pieces. You need something that has close range damage, because I focus on close range damage personally, with the exact other same stats, because this will make a difference against the spider boss, for example, which is an almost 1 versus 1 fight and you need to deal high damage, and Damascus offering lacks a little bit. However, the Inferno Seed will be able to melt that boss very fast, and because we have the Brain Eater, you don't have to invest any mods, so you can run it as it is, and that's what I recommend. Now let's have a closer look at certain mods I tried for the weapons that may seem good in paper but are actually pretty bad to run with. So I also tried to run String of Ghosts. It's actually pretty terrible. I don't know why it doesn't proc as often as I wanted, and in comparison I lose a lot of single target DPS, so I don't really recommend it. I tried Ultimate Damage Sling, which is actually not as bad as you can think. It links up to 4 enemies and they share a little weapon damage and anomaly damage. However, I didn't see a very good increase in timers and I lose a lot of single target DPS, especially sometimes you will remain alone one versus one versus the boss, or you will kill everything else and you won't be able to take as much advantage with ultimate damage link. It's actually something you can try yourself if you want, but I don't really recommend it for the best choice compared to Dark Sacrifice or the Fortress. I also tried the pinball because every critical shot ricochets to 4 enemies within 5 meter radius, dealing weapon double base damage. It's actually pretty terrible. The damage it dealt after a half expedition I wanted to try is very bad. That's why I don't recommend it and I don't like it. Now that being said, there could be other decent options for tier 3 mods you can run. Ultimate Ashen Bullets is something if you want super crowd control without investing, let's say, for the status power for Ash Blast and Feed the Flames. However, you lose a lot of single target DPS. And I also could recommend to run something like Shadow Comment, or Deadly Disturbance could be very good because you will go a lot of criticals against elites and bosses and you have a better AoE every 3 seconds, but in the cost once again in single target DPS. So these mods for the Disturbance, Shadow Comment, Ultimate Bone Shrapnel could be decent. I didn't try them all because they're not as good as you can think, or Ultimate Storm Whip or Ultimate Anomaly Surge. I do prefer to have something more because we have a lot of bonus firepower and we take more advantage of something that increases our firepower. Singularity was one of my favorite mods, however, it has a 6-second cooldown now and I don't like it for only that reason. 6-second cooldown is very long. We're finally here to the talent section and we're going to analyze each individual node by itself. So first things first, I'm going to the Ashbreaker, not all in. I have to get Wildfire and dip in a little bit in the Firestorm tree. Without this, Ash Blast will have more than 10 seconds cooldown. That means Death Sentence won't be up for 100% of the time and Ashes and Leeches won't be up 100% of the time. That's why I do recommend to go like this. Usually we take Moth to the Flame and Leeching Force to increase our weapon leech, but Ash Blast makes a huge difference for survivability. When you stun the whole map every 8 seconds, you will see the difference. You will use this skill much more frequently compared to the other build, and that's why we're going with the Wildfire. Now let's have a closer look at each individual node. For the Ashbreaker, increase weapon damage. Of course, we reduce the cooldowns of our immobilized skills. We don't need weapon leech. We're going to have this thanks to our mods. Weapon damage against marked enemies. Assault Master is actually the only up, let's say, choice I get, because it increases our weapon damage by 20% for assault weapons and it's actually very good. We have to go by Trial by Ashes because it inflicts damage for enemies afflicted by Ash by 10%, and we don't get Blood Boil. As I told you, Armor Piercing is useless when we're using Volcanic rounds and you don't get any benefit. We get Mark of the Anomaly, another 10% weapon damage against masked enemies. Now here, I do prefer Curse of the Pompeii. Ash inflicts on enemies last percent longer. Conflagration won't increase the damage for volcanic rounds as much, but it will increase the damage of Claymore Torrent. However, I do prefer to have Curse of the Pompeii, because thanks to this, and thanks to 90% status power, we will keep the enemies in Ash for 4 or 5 seconds. It's quite a long, you will see and feel the difference. Just try it yourself. Just try a build without status power, with 0, and without or with 1 Curse of the Pompeii. You will see the huge difference to the enemies remain in Ash and we deal a lot of damage to them. Another 10% weapon damage against marked enemies, 8% weapon damage because Blood Boil is useless, another 10% weapon damage against marked enemies. We have a total of 40%. Now enemies afflicted by Ash will get vulnerable as well. And because of status power, this will remain very long, so another 50% free extra damage is always nice. We don't go for Moth to the Flame. This is a mandatory Nimble as a Flame, useless, unfortunately, perk that we will never reload, hopefully. 10% more damage against elites, receive 10% less damage against elites is always good, 15% less cooldowns for the immobilized skills, and of course 15% increased damage for enemies afflicted by Ash. So we have another 25% thanks to our talents, and another 20 thanks to Ash and Boost, so in total 45% extra damage, that's why it's very good. And this actually is not weapon damage, it's plain damage, so Claymore Torrent scales with this as well, and of course the burning situation to have a 45% weapon damage increase whenever we use the immobilize skill. We don't take Sniper Master because we're not using snipers, and Anomaly Power doesn't scale with anything. It doesn't scale with weapon damage, doesn't scale with mod damage, it only scales with a burn, and this is not our primary source of DPS, that's why we just ignore this. Now here of course we take the Magma Golem, 6% skill leads, another Magma Golem, and Wildfire because we need to lower the cooldowns of Ash Blast and Feed the Flames. We don't take Warm Up because in most situations you will never be able to run out of volcanic rounds. However, Unquenchable 6% skill leads is actually pretty good in combination with the Damascus offering. We have 10% skill leads that we will take from the burn, and burn doesn't hit as hard compared to other builds. However, it is very useful, so it will counter attack the downside of Dark Sacrifice as long as 3 to 4 enemies are burning. So it's always nice to have it, and we don't actually need to lower the volcanic rounds cooldown. Now we're going for a few tips while we use the build. There aren't many because actually this is the easiest, let's say most easy going build you can have, especially if you go with Damascus offering. So the tips I have with Damascus offering, I already gave them. Hip fire against most enemies. You don't have to aim, only go for criticals against elites that you see in the battlefield, and only after you apply Ash, it will just increase a lot of burst. Be careful with Ash Blast, especially in frontline. Sometimes you will inflict Ash on enemies as they spawn, and they will remain in a place that you will not be able to just kill them, and that will affect a little your timers. However, if you don't care about timers, don't care about this, just spam Ash Blast whenever you can. Don't forget to feed the flames, especially even with the Damascus offering. If you forget to do that and you save it for later, you will run out of volcanic rounds. Have a secondary weapon. I do recommend an assault rifle for single target DPS in case you plan to go for the spider monster. This will be better, or if you have the tactical submachine, you don't need the tactical AR. Tactical submachine is actually pretty decent against the spider monster because it has a weak spot. That's why we need something that deals basic high damage, because in comparison, Damascus offering criticals for 300 or more thousand in comparison. The tactical ARs critical for more than 800,000, and the submachine I think criticals for 400 to 500,000. So you see the difference, and especially if there is a weak spot and the multiplier is higher, the damages go higher, and you have to kill the spider monster as soon as you can. You have to keep using Ash Blast, it's very important. This is the survivability tool. Because it stuns the enemies, it gives you life leech, it debuffs the enemies to take extra damage. In case you stop using it and you fight, let's say, an elite and you want to save it for other enemies, don't do that. Even if the enemies are outside the spawn point. Because without the Ash Blast, we don't have 40% skill leads, and you can actually die 1 versus an elite or a boss. That's why we have to spam it. Before we close this video, let's talk about some advantages and disadvantages while using the build. We actually have one of the best single target DPS compared to the other specs we have, because other builds can do crazy things, and other builds, now we're working on the disadvantages, have better legendary sets. That's why they're superior. Not only they cannot perform the bonus firepower if we, for example, go for tier 2 mods or epic pieces only, but we have the better legendary set, so you have a better endgame. Because we have the Akari set, it's wonderful. We have the Reforged set, it's actually now one of the best sets, one of my favorite sets to run. Lava Leech is actually not the best, but it's not the worst. You can actually do pretty decent builds with Lava Leech, and it will be, let's say, the tier 2, the A rank if you want, compared to the S rank other legendary sets. But the Torturer set, as we mentioned in the beginning, it's not even a B, it's a C, C-. It's awful, no good set bonus, no good mods, because there are a couple of mandatory mods that are actually very, very bad for bonus firepower build, and it's the most underwhelming. And I don't know, in my opinion, if you go for bonus firepower Pyromancer, never use the Torturer set. it's much better to use epic pieces. You could do something with the aura of the volcanic rounds, however, I tried a similar build to just compare it with the torture set, and it outperforms the torture set because it has better cooldowns, and we have better mods to choose from compared to the torture set. Because yes, cooldown reduction matters for bonus firepower Pyromancer, in comparison with other classes such as the Technomancer, for example, that cooldowns aren't as important that I just recently leveled up, and the firepower build doesn't need cooldowns. It can function with just bonus firepower, close range damage and long range damage, but we cannot do that. We need to use our skills, we need to replenish our ammo using our skills, and we do need the Ash Blast for crowd control and increased DPS. And this is the end of the video. Thank you very much in case you stick around so long for the in-depth analysis for the bonus firepower Pyromancer build. I do intend to make most of my videos like this. In case you like it, feel free to leave your comments in the section below, because I do prefer to have two options, one for the players that don't want to bother, for example, to listen to all the details or the alternate modes and everything, just want a quick guide to see what I use, a 5-10 minutes long video, and I will do the longer videos for 25-35 minutes, depending on the discussion and the things I tried for the classes and builds. So in case you like one or two, you can just get a glimpse of the build and you can wait for the in-depth analysis in case you want to just hear it, or you can skip the first build and just wait for the in-depth analysis in case you don't want to watch two videos. Feel free to like if you like the video and to subscribe to stay tuned for more upcoming videos for Outriders New Horizon and other video games. And as always, I wish you all a wonderful day and also have a happy new year, everyone.